Right, welcome to this panel, everyone. The consumer is always right. So, as with any sector, the companies leading must continually listen to their core customer base when developing their market strategy. There are lots of unique approaches to cannabis consumption being adopted around the world, whether it's cafes in the Netherlands, social clubs in Spain, or dispensaries in North America, to a possible pharmacy-based approach in Germany. Add to that different delivery methods such as vapes, gummies, smoking, you name it. There are more choices than ever today. So across both medical and recreational, we've got good expertise on both sides of that coin today. With so many options on the table and Europe still relatively fertile ground, which models and methods will be at the forefront of the European industry as it continues to emerge, and which companies will come out with the new technologies to deliver cannabis, or do we even need new technologies? We'll get into that. So we've got a panel of experts to discuss the importance of a customer-first approach in this market. So just quickly go and do our introductions. We've got Calvin Rassodi, VP of Marketing at Brains Bioceutical, next to me. They produce certified pharmaceutical products, including cannabinoids, from their Canada HQ. We've also got Sebastian Beguri, CEO and co-founder of Canavape, a European CBD product provider. We've got George Scorsis, Executive Chairman of Entourage Health, a Toronto-based cannabis product producer. And we've got Vladimir Kovchigarski, Chief Sales Officer at PHCan, which is a Poland HQ'd pharmaceutical cannabis producer with a cultivation facility in Macedonia. So I'll come to you first, Vladimir, as a Polish cannabis producer.
That won't hurt, right?
A European cannabis producer. Why do we need these products? Why does the consumer need this? Could you give us a bit of an overview of what is the patient need, just to introduce the discussion?
Well, there are several diseases that the cannabis plant can actually treat, from multiple sclerosis, cancer, epilepsy, Parkinson's, etc., etc. So I think it's a very young industry. I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of education of the market, the GPs, especially when they're prescribing to the patients, and the patients are always in need. They just need to find to be convinced to find an alternative for the alternative medicine. Like the cannabis industry can do a lot of good in the next 20 to 30 years. We just need to step up our game as a community and push much harder to implement and take out that stigmatization that is in place at the moment. So I think all of us here, we could do much better. Everyone is doing harder they can, but we've got a lot of things to do and progress in future because the patients are in need of this beautiful plant.
Are we still on there? Yeah, great introduction to the sort of European context and perspective. Moving to you, George, as someone who's based in Canada and one of the more mature markets out there, how would you, I guess, compare and contrast the consumer perception of cannabis, whether that be adult market or medical market? How much has changed in Canada in recent times in terms of the perception, and how can that inform what European companies do?
Yeah, look, Canada opened up as a fully medical market, and a lot of the Europeans are playing with that right now, and they're seeing the evolution of it. But I think even within the medical market, there was consumers that were curious, interested, even adult use consumers or recreational consumers that entered into the medical market from the gray market. I think what you're starting to see is you're seeing a very quick split between the two. Within Canada, at least, and actually within the US in most markets. But I think the foundation of what we're doing is the same. It doesn't matter what platform. We all need to be stewards of producing high quality products and not just jeopardize and produce low quality products in either channel. But I do think the way you address the consumer and the patient are very different. And I think we need to be aware of it. Although there is some spillover, they are very unique in their needs, how they're addressing some of their needs. So I think you'll see that evolution take place.
Yeah, so essentially that they are two very different segments that people are going to be appealing to. Calvin, with Brains, you address the pharmaceutical market, but also something called the nutraceutical market. Can you tell us a bit about that breakdown and introduce people to what nutraceutical means if they're not familiar?
For sure. So we've found at Brains Bio that there's a gap in the market, especially when it comes to CBD. And a lot of the success that we've had at Brains is because we're able to supply the data that not only the consumer is looking for, but the retailer is looking for, or our brand partners are looking for. So an example of that is we've got a co-branded product with Vitabiotics. They're UK's largest vitamin company. And in our conversation with bringing this market forward with Vitabiotics, a lot of it was around safety, trust, and efficacy. So our president, Terry O'Regan, spoke earlier today about how, maybe on the pharmaceutical side, but generating that data is so critical. And from a retailer perspective, when we're speaking to Holland and Barrett, they're really looking to partner with brands who can bring forward credible data to support what we're doing and build on the foundation. Because unfortunately, there have been some bad players in the space that have put products on the market, and then after the fact, when it goes for independent testing or there's third party audits done, it's coming out that these products aren't what they're advertised as, and essentially that makes the whole industry look bad. So we're really committed on bringing forward data, bringing forward, obviously starting with a raw ingredient that meets the highest quality standards, which is EU GMP, and we produce that here in the UK. But we found that to be a big part of our success starts with the raw ingredient.
Yeah, and as you say, having that data to make a case to trusted providers like a Holland and Barrett, and yeah, go on.
Absolutely, yeah, and one company, we're doing what we can, but I think as an industry, it's important that more companies commit to taking that route because it's ultimately going to help not only the end consumer, but the whole industry advance and bring a lot more credibility to what we're trying to build on.
Yeah, and coming to you, sticking with CBD, Sebastian, I guess we can look at CBD as a kind of a forerunner to the THC cannabis market in Europe. It feels as though it's almost ubiquitous now. Tell us a bit about the journey of educating people about CBD and also dealing with some of those stories of bad actors, perhaps associated with negative stories around vaping as well. How has that gone at Cannovate?
Yeah, it's been a long journey basically because back in 2014, when I came out with Cannavape, the first hemp vaporizer, as I wanted to call it, very fast it got picked up into like a new legal cannabis, and people really look at CBD from different angles. So we talk about the medical aspect, but also obviously it was also a way to have access to cannabis as like for adult use, let's say. And from there, the regulation was not ready. Obviously, that's what got me into a big court case with France because they didn't understand what was CBD, which along the way that opened a huge gap for people to come in, as there was like this gray area, which is still not really clear. And yeah, from there, a lot of scamming regarding like certificate of analysis, where due to lack of regulation, first of all, lack of labs back in the days, even so now it's getting better, but there's no authority that go and check that. So it's been a journey into really educating. So now the public opinion is understanding that CBD has different effect, that is something else than marijuana. Now it's interesting to see how the authorities will pick up to really help to secure the product for consumer, because at the end that's them who matter, and especially in Europe the big thing is around also the CBD flower. You guys are in Canada, so you have experiencing a good framework, but in Europe we're still dealing with like some shady CBD flower which has to be under 0.3% THC. And for a long time to get to that level, people were actually washing out those flowers to remove the THC. And on top of it, terpenes, it was really, and it's still in some cases, not really clean process. And so the consumer needs to know that, and then brand needs to actually pick up on that to actually propose some good quality cannabis.
And how is that going, that journey to, cleaning up the product?
So basically, actually, it's a consumer drive, because basically after 3 years of like massive introduction of this type of product to the market, consumers start to understand that this was not the right product. So they were looking for higher quality, and the shops actually had to start to follow the trends, which is actually funny because to get a nice CBD flower that needs to be a little bit above 0.3. And I mean, for France, there's many players that actually took the risk to introduce a bit higher THC level to ensure like better quality. And then after the big work, it's to with the institutions because they all have their way to regulate and and you need to take into account every aspect, not to have actually opening a gate for black markets or for any how to say description, because labeling is also a big thing. So it's still an ongoing process, to be honest, not easy, but and I think as brand we need to actually work on that. So.
Yeah, no, great point. And then, George, just coming back to you, and from this experience of a slightly more mature market, talking, I guess, about. Let's start off by talking about adult use. How has increasing competition, such a big flow of new companies into the space? We were just talking about this before we got on stage. How has that kind of fueled innovation, and sometimes, in your view, the wrong innovation? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think with increased competition in the space, what generally happens in any market or any category is, people try. Innovation is not true innovation. It's driven by price, and price is not the best way for any of us to compete in the marketplace, especially winning the consumer. You're not going to bring a consumer from the legacy space into a regulated space strictly off of price. And I think that's the biggest learning that, especially an accelerated market like Canada or the US really saw, that so many people all of a sudden just decided to bring, what I would say, non-premium flower into the marketplace and start trying to discount. That's not innovation. That's the furthest thing from it. In consumer packaged goods, it's really about listening to the consumer. And what we didn't do very well is listen to the consumer, because the consumer is very split. There's a new cannabis consumer that's going to enter the marketplace, and their needs are very different than an experienced or legacy user. An experienced or legacy user was telling us, these are the products we've had in our marketplace for several years. So if you look in Canada now, one of the fastest growing segments in adult use is an infused pre-roll. This is no surprise to a legacy user. It's been around the legacy market for several years, but we just weren't listening. Now it's one of the fastest growing SKUs in the space. So we needed to really hear, listen, innovate based on the consumer base that we're driving in. But we also, it's almost a little bit dichotomous, because there's a new consumer that we were trying to drive in. That new consumer needed to be educated. They needed to understand how to be dosed. They needed to understand what product to use, or actually what formulation to use for what they really needed, because it's a social experiment. I always say, my background comes from alcohol. We had 200 years to learn what 2 beers would feel like. Cannabis, we haven't had that time for many consumers. So the new consumer really is more of an education platform, but really innovation is about us listening better. And actually, in many cases, on the adult use brand that I oversee, we've brought most of our innovation pipeline has been through bringing legacy owners of businesses into our business and saying, we need this. So that's really, I would say, it's kind of been the change.
And on that, that second group, I guess, the ones that you're bringing in, how big are sort of non-combustible delivery methods here? What ones are you increasingly looking at?
Yeah, I think you'll see that there's definitely a bias when you see what I would say a new cannabis user. They generally try to stay away. They have this belief in their head that combustible is, you don't want to smell a certain way or how it's going to impact you. But there's other ways of combusting. You can vaporize. You can, they don't need to always go to the highest potency flower, and that's an education for them as well. But most do deviate. They want to go to potentially an edible format or other factors that they would like to do. Combustion generally isn't their first one if they're a new consumer to the category. What we've seen in Canada, at least.
Yeah. And Vladimir, coming to you as someone who is addressing a growing and emerging medical market, George touched on the issue of education there. But can you tell us about the challenges? Perhaps use the UK as an example where we are, about how far the sort of, public knowledge and, perhaps this is a kind of the fault of the medical system, but where are we in terms of awareness?
That's a good question. Probably I have to answer this so I can explain. At the moment, obviously, we are EU GMP licensed manufacturing facility in Macedonia from the Polish inspector, which is one of the toughest in Europe. And we are present in companies like countries in UK, Germany, Poland. We had the first authorization of the oils in Poland, in Czech Republic as well, first ever import for the oils. We are under registration in Italy, Portugal, and Malta at the moment, obviously UK, and then we go into Brazil, Uruguay, we already present in Australia, and New Zealand, and Brazil, and Uruguay. The reason why I'm saying this is because every country has a different approach in terms of regulations. It's like you cannot compare one country to another. It's so, like in Poland, for example, it takes a year and a half to have a market authorization of your product, where in UK, you don't have that issue. It's more vibrant here. In UK, for example, the issue that I'm seeing, I mean, we've started exporting our products end of May last year, and because we sell normally non-irrigated flour, because we don't irrigate our flour, you have the much bigger, obviously life and bigger terpene profiles, trichomes, etc. So we had a huge success in the first couple of months. So we grasped around 15-20% of market share in UK till Christmas last year. What is fascinating for me, we actually organizing doctor visits. We just had last week, we had the second doctor visit from UK doctors actually prescribing to the cannabis patients. We do that so we can encourage them and say, please come and see what you're actually prescribing, to see the facility. It's a huge facility, around 18,000 square meters with 15 tons capacity per year of flour and half a ton of extraction capacity per year. So the education side of it is they need to be more, how do I say, the doctors are the front line basically between us and the end of the patients. From this side, the wholesaler and the producer, and then you have the doctors. They need to be more brave. Like, they need to step up from their traditional environment. There are many cases that the cannabis products can replace, any and it make it even better from the generic products. I was amazed to hear that 80% of the public in UK have no clue that cannabis is legal in UK. So that's like only 2 out of 10 people, if you're walking on the street, they have no idea it's legal. So I guess to the companies and our partners also, everyone that is in the cannabis industry in UK, they've got a lot to do in terms of progressing further, educating, the public knowledge. But on the other side, they've got strains where they have regulations. They cannot advertise. So it's like it's a gray area. They're trying all their best, but at the moment, I think it's like 25,000 patients in UK, 25,000, where Germany have around 200,000. Australia started 2 years ago from, 50,000 to 250,000 in a year. They're multiplying every month. So it's the work in UK and also worldwide, basically. It depends on the regulation of each country. So it's much vibrant in Australia, much easier to do in Australia than in UK, for example, or Brazil. It's a big no-no. You cannot basically do anything. There are strict rules, which is good. Don't get me wrong. That's good. We just need to adhere to those. And we as a producer, because we are pretty much have footprint worldwide, we can see different country, how they actually behave and who they're copying from which country to.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about the consumer or the end consumer being the patient, not necessarily being the customer who you have to convince, and the physician being the middleman there. What is the sort of, would you say there's still a stigma in that medical community in the UK? Like, what are the typical, I guess, defensive responses you get about not engaging with medical cannabis?
The patient, there is no issue with the patients. It's just a matter of taking out that stigma from the doctor's perspective.
Yeah, what's
Like-
the traditional doctor saying when they bring you
They
that
are
stigma?
just not sure what would the cannabis do. Basically, they stick to what they know. They're in the comfort zone, you know. So there are a lot of, like, I can see it from the last 2 visits from the doctors. So you've got to hear, you've got a generational change from the doctors. So, you know, youngsters, like, 40, 45 max. That's pretty much it. Where now any doctors that it's like 45, 50, they're sticking to their comfort zone. Like, I'll just give you an example. It's in Australia, it's only 5% of the GPs are only currently prescribing cannabis. So you can imagine how much Australia can further go in that regard. So our main goal for everyone is basically encourage the doctors and help them like what we're doing with tours, visiting of the facilities, give them more education and make it happen, because obviously the cannabis plant can replace, and they had great feedbacks from what we had from the doctors that saying to us. I mean, so some great examples that they love it and the patients love it. They've been using a couple of years generic products, whatever, and then they'll switch to cannabis. They'll see the improvement within the next 2-3 months. So we do have a great product, as in general, as a community. We just need to make sure that the doctors are more, much braver. They need to step up from their comfort zone.
Interesting generational point there as well. I guess it's only moving in one direction as GPs get younger. Calvin, coming to you, tell us about some of the different markets you serve and how that education piece across different products, like how do you vary that messaging?
Yeah, so I think we serve a couple different markets. One is on the specials side here in the UK, where we're working with doctors who are prescribing the specials medication. And I think when you're looking at medical cannabis, there's a lot of variability in strains, or looking at a certain ailment, whether it might be epilepsy or insomnia or pain. And for a doctor to understand, what strain do I prescribe for this if you're looking at medical cannabis as flower. So what we've done is we've put forward a range of products that's created with isolates, because what we can do with that is actually give the doctors the confidence and the data that they need to know that they're going to get consistency batch over batch when they're prescribing these medications. And I think that's important for the consumer as well. And we've taken a similar approach on the consumer side. A lot of on the consumer side comes down to education, but speaking from a marketing point of view, it's very hard to market CBD products. So, Google, you can't do programmatic. On Facebook, you can't run paid ads. So from a digital perspective, you're fairly handcuffed, right? And you can make a lot of investment into things like your Instagram page or building a brand, just to wake up one morning and find out that you've been taken down, or all that investment is gone. So you're constantly trying to find innovative ways. And with Vitabiotics, we do a lot of out-of-home advertising, so tube ads, bus ads, and a lot of traditional PR, but trying to find that omni-channel approach that's going to be effective in the modern era, but also navigating when there's such a need for education. And one of the things I find has worked well for us is we've created a range of products that's paired. So for example, we've got a CBD plus ashwagandha, or a CBD and turmeric, or a CBD and magnesium, because we find that when we do the in-store retail education and the in-store merchandising, that it gives, for example, the store staff at Holland & Barrett to now be able to speak to the products. And so merchandising has been key to our success, and where we spend a lot of our focus from a marketing point of view.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting about, the prudishness of some of these big tech platforms' advertising policies. How have you got around that, Sebastian? How have you dealt with that at Canavate?
Yeah, that's a big issue in our industry, and the way I'm now trying to see, well, with Canavape, I had let's say the chance to have the media on my side, so that came out through breaking news, which kind of went viral, so that kind of gave me a good publicity on that one. Even so, nowadays, Canavap is kind of like a brand from the past, which I'm trying to re-emerge. But what I see with consumer behavior and trends, they look at more as like brands that go into more like the American lifestyles, what you can find in California, which has been kind of the let's say, the leading market for us. And basically, I'm trying to, with this new brand called Golden Buds, to involve more like artist communities. So to try to get like people that are not necessarily into the cannabis, to avoid like the pressure of talking about cannabis, and have like influencers, known people to be used for cannabis, talking about our brand and trying to create some collabs. So I would say right now I would see a lot of potential into developing collabs, especially that to me I step a bit out of the medical situation, because when you talk about CBD, it can be very touchy. Actually, that got me into trouble as well, because one of my prosecution was illegal practice of pharmacy, because they saw that I was bringing some kind of medical product, which was not, it's just a vape. But the way it's really to just try to bring the lifestyles into the CBD consumer, and as well as when we try to talk about differentiation into product choice. So there's the administration. So for people who are like long-term smokers, then you do education on the benefits of vaporizations as harm reduction. And then the other ways to speak more about like strains. So with my vapes, I do a lot of terpenes blend with different cannabinoids. So we try to put further the name of the strains, which would be associated with more like aromatherapy lexicum, which is less touchy than when you talk specifically about cannabis. So that's the way I'm trying to advertise it now, is to really talk about this entourage effect that we found through the terpenes and through the way of administrations.
Yeah, interesting, that sort of workaround of influencer marketing, allowing the brand to get out there. What have you done, Calvin, to get around these kind of restrictions?
Yeah, it's really a challenge, and I've had multiple accounts shut down myself by some of the big platforms when we've tried to invest and grow. So influencers is definitely a part of that strategy, but there's we could go on about influencer marketing for in its own chat, and the challenges you face there. So I think having an omni-channel approach is so critical, because there really are two markets as well. One is people who are familiar with the product who are currently using it, but a lot of the work that we're trying to do at Brains Bio is educate the consumer that hasn't felt comfortable with purchasing products. So, our tagline on our bus ads and our tube ads with Vitabiotics is CBD you can trust. And through the consumer surveys we conducted, we found that was a critical point, that there still wasn't enough trust in what was available on the market. So I think having an omni-channel approach across, PR, digital, traditional out of home. We do radio. We're sponsoring rugby matches here in the UK. So we're really trying to spread a wide net and then hone back on what's most effective. We, of course, still do a lot of digital advertising, but we just have to be very creative in how we're running those ads and how we're navigating the different programmatic platforms to get them through. But it's a constant challenge. It's in past businesses, it's been turn it on and forget about it, and you can walk away from it. And for myself now, it's a twice a day check-in to make sure that things haven't been halted or things haven't stopped, because it's flagged in a way that would cause the sort of programmatic to take it down.
Yeah, it's a serious headache. I don't envy that. Well, we talked quite a bit about different types of products, different types of marketing strategies, but oh, go on, yeah.
Yeah, so just because you talked about the trust of product, and this is a very, very important point, because so far in Europe, the industry has been driven by distributors who benefit of a large distribution network to get products to the consumer, and they just build brands just to fill up that portfolio. Yeah. Meaning that until now, there hasn't been a real proper work on branding where consumer can look after, and they can go to any shops and they say, I want this brand, because they know the work behind. And this is actually now the moment for those brands to step out, because the distributor are just, like George was saying, their aim was just price, which is now being overrated, and the brands have to make the difference.
Yeah, no, great follow-up. I want to just quickly, before we've got just over 5 minutes left, and we haven't really spoken so much about the sort of infrastructure, how people get their cannabis. And George, again, before we went on stage, you discussed some of the innovation that's gone on in the dispensary space. What can Europe learn from your home market about what is a good way, and what people want in terms of how to access this cannabis?
When you talk about recreational use or adult use and non-medical, which is most of Europe right now, I think, when you take a look at how people were actually getting their product historically, the best education tool that they ever had was their dealer. And that's the truth of the matter. The dealer used to come to them, talk about the terpene profile, talk about the quality, show them the bud. What we did in most cases across North America is we tried to digitize and take that emotional connection away. And a lot of people use the terminology, we were the iStore of cannabis, whatever that even means, because it's not the right way. The consumer still wanted to interact with the bud tender, really understand about the product, touch it, feel it, understand it, and smell it. And I think when we take away some of those, that humanistic approach or that one-on-one touch point, that's when the industry is going to fail, and it's going to drive people out of that, because you're also missing the educational aspect of it to new consumers. So you're not going to capture what I would say the legacy consumer or the new consumer by doing that. But I think also in terms of innovation, your bud tender oftentimes is your best feedback mechanism, because a consumer is going to come in and they're going to say, hey, you know what, I tried this, or have you thought of this? And that gives us the feedback. Again, this is highly recreational speaking, but I think it's important that we just don't totally dismiss this interaction, because this interaction is what has made this whole social experiment very, very successful. And the plant is very complex. It's not a simple plant. So so I think that's where we need to improve.
That's very similar to what's happening in the UK right now, even with CBD, because if you look at the sales funnel of how consumers going about buying the product, the consumer will go into a Holland & Barrett, for example, or the same way they'd go into a dispensary in Canada, and they know what they're looking for, but they haven't really familiarized themselves with too many brands or too many options yet. So similar to a bud tender in Canada, is you have the store staff here at Holland & Barrett that are doing a lot of that education. So that's where we found, by having a very aggressive merchandising strategy and really educating the in-store staff, that it's very critical in communicating the differences in the brand. There's only so much that you can do on the package. There's only so much you can do with the shelf talker or display unit. But when you have the in-store staff educated, it can really, really, be a pivotal factor in the success and the sell-through once you're listed on the shelf.
Yeah, good point. And how have you found, I guess, Holland & Barrett compared to the sort of, the stigma in the medical profession? They're perhaps a bit more used to alternative treatments. How has that been, training that staff?
Yeah, I think Holland & Barrett is a store that's a good, it's a logical fit for a product like CBD, but in some of the other retailers, like Boots, for example, where Vitabiotics currently listed, I think that's where the ads, talking about products that you can trust and doing a lot of that, building the awareness around the category as a whole and filling the top of the funnel is so critical, because the approach that you would take with a Boots over a Holland & Barrett is going to be very different for that exact reason.
Yeah, great point. Well, we're coming close to the end, so we're just going to go for a European perspective from you, Vladimir, to close us out. I mean, tell us about the markets you're addressing in Europe. Where is growing fastest, and where are you most excited about in the next 5 years or so?
Well, as I previously mentioned, we're pretty much everywhere in Europe. Under registration in Portugal, again, Italy, very strict markets, especially. Malta is coming soon. Then we already export to Poland, Czech Republic, Germany, obviously, and also Israel. The thing is, from European perspective, everyone was waiting for this rec to come in on in end of March from the German government, which was a huge setback especially for the investors. Now, it's a good and bad thing, because the medical side of it will continue to accelerate. I'm not against the rec, don't get me wrong, but there is a decent path of like 3 to 5 years for the German market to go to rec, which is the proper way. I fully agree with that. Now, on the other side, you have the Polish market, so regulated. It's it's extensive documentations for authorizations, etc., etc. And then you have UK more easygoing, relaxed environment. So it's a different aspect. So I would say the German market will be basically leader. It will continue to be a leader in Europe. We see the growth and the potential in the Czech Republic market. We have great partners over there, Motagon. We see the growth in the UK market, especially with our partners Grow Pharma and IPS. And in Germany, we do have our own office, and now we sell our brand and also with white label customers. So we see a huge penetration in the next couple of months over there. So those are the markets that kind of stand out. The Polish market, once we finalize our market authorization for the flower, apart from the oils, then we'll see huge, higher penetration in that market. So, and Italy and Portugal are kind of niche markets that will probably be coming later than the previous mentioned countries because they're much slower and they haven't had any real experience with cannabis apart from exporting from Portugal, but not for the domestic market. So in Italy it's a different case. You have the army regulating everything. They're producing, but they're also importing. But from what we can see, there is a lot of demand. And not enough supply at the moment in the Italian market.
Well, good news for you and a lot of other companies here. So good note to end on. Thanks very much to all our panelists. Give them a round of applause. Some great points made today.